Done this before, but let's see how it
Probably
goes.
get my Kleenex before I start this.
Yeah. All right. I'm gonna go ahead and hop on my Facebook here and look. All right. Good evening, everybody on Albert's List, and welcome to this evening's session. We're going to be talking about job interview questions, and I think there might be a poll somewhere along the lines here too, but I'm not entirely sure. And so, yeah, we'll go ahead and stream this for a little bit as people start to join, and wait for all of you guys to come in. So right now we have 3 people, now 5.
How do I jump into this live stream? I'm on the event.
Yeah, hop into the main Facebook tab, group tab,
Okay.
and it should be on that timeline somewhere.
Timeline.
Yeah.
Because I went to the event itself, but I guess that doesn't work.
No, I mean I'm streaming in the actual group, and we're live right now. So
In the actual group.
this conversation is being recorded live while people are here. So welcome everybody. We now have 12 people on the line. We're going to wait a little bit for some more people to get here. Tonight's topic is mastering job interview questions. Invite a friend, invite 5 friends. We don't have anything better to do on a quarantine day anyway, right? Even though it is nice outside, I do implore all of you to go outside and walk. But yeah, if you have any questions about interviewing during this session today, place them in the comments. Corey will try to answer them as live as he possibly can. And in the meantime, we'll just be going through the presentation. And I look forward to hearing each and every one of your thoughts as you watch this video. Interviewing, as you know, is is the most important part of any single interview. And you definitely want to be able to do it and do it well here. So let me turn my volume down on my phone so I can track the comments. So welcome. I'm Albert, founder of Albert's List. We've been here now for 7 years, and you know, this is the first time our Facebook group has gone through a recession. I mean, I guess we can all agree that it's a recession at this point. And we've been kind of growing for the last 7 years and really enjoying ourselves. And so with everything that's going on, tomorrow being the beginning of yet another month of quarantining and people interviewing, it's important for us to get ahead of things and really be here to help. And so I brought in CORY HIROMOTO, founder of careershakers.com, and he's also a fellow alumnus of mine from Santa Clara University. And so there's a lot of Bronco love going on here, and we actually have a lot of Broncos who hang out in this group because they've one way or another heard about us. And so today we're going to be talking about interview questions. If you have any interview questions about interview questions rather that you'd like to ask, feel free to go for it. Other than that, you know, Corey, I'm going to hand it off to you. Feel free to introduce yourself and get started, and I'll interrupt you from time to time if any of our audience members have any questions to ask.
Perfect. This is great. Thanks so much, Albert. Really appreciate the opportunity. I'll definitely get into introductions into myself here in a second. Just to comment on the whole chat feature, both Albert and I are going to be looking at the chat intermittently during the event, and I will pause pretty much at the end of every section to open it up for some Q&A. I want it to be as interactive as possible. When we were planning on doing this live, I really like to have a really high interactive component of it, just because no one likes lectures, and so we're trying to keep each other entertained, but also make it as informative as possible. So in this session, we're going to cover all the different types of possible interview questions you could potentially see when you are interviewing, either coming up right now or hopefully your job is not affected by COVID in any way, but if it is, I know that this is going to be a really hot topic in the upcoming months. If you stumbled across our event and were looking for something else, I highly recommend you stay anyways. I promise this is going to be a really, really valuable use of time. It's going to be super helpful no matter what's currently going on right now. So just to start, on the topic of being highly interactive. I would love for folks in the chat to start to get acclimated. For those of you who are introverted, you're probably loving the fact this is a webinar and not live face-to-face. Feel free in the chat, just comment, what your current company is that you're working at, what your job title is right now, and if you're looking for an opportunity, what types of jobs you're looking for. One of my favorite parts about Albert's List is the community aspect. I've been in the group for almost about a year now, a year and a half, and I noticed how everyone really bands together to help out each other. Everyone's really friendly and collaborative. So feel free to start commenting in the chat what you currently do, if you're looking for work. This is a great way for you guys to get some free and easy networking with each other. Feel free to personal message each other, reach out, see if people have the same interests or jobs or work at, maybe your dream company. This is a really great opportunity for everyone. Let me just see here, see folks. There might be a bit of a delay in my live feed.
We have 35 people on the line right now, and the numbers are growing every bit, so it's good.
Awesome. Well, thank you everyone for tuning in.
While we wait for people to answer the prompt here, why did you choose these 4 questions in particular?
So I think this is just a really quick and easy way for folks to just kind of introduce themselves to others. When everyone is doing those networking sessions, I feel like this is kind of the first stuff that always comes up. And I mean, we're all here to help each other. And I feel like it's a really great way to kind of introduce each other and see if there's any potential networking opportunities that'll be great for all of us. In terms of my story itself, I actually got almost all of the jobs that I currently have right now, which we'll get into in a little bit. But I actually got all of my jobs through networking opportunities. And so awesome. I can attest to the power and benefit of networking. And so that's why I always try to reserve some time for this, especially if folks are willing to take time out of their crazy schedules to participate. And again, Albert, your community is so strong, and whenever someone posts their resume or has a job, the comments just start rolling in within minutes. And so I just thought I'd give folks that opportunity.
Yeah, definitely. I don't see anyone yet, so I guess everybody is sitting on the sidelines. If you are feeling shy, now is not the time to feel shy. Write down your name, current company, current job title, and what jobs you're looking for. We're here to help you tonight. So if you can interact and engage, you will get the most out of tonight's session.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's okay. Maybe it's because people would like for me to go first, and that's totally fine.
Yeah.
So I'll just shift for a little bit of quick background about myself. Albert gave me a really great introduction, but quick snapshot about myself. I was born and raised in Hawaii. I do have an 808 area code, so if any of us do get to work together in the future, I'm used to getting screened out by the spam filter in the iPhones these days. But I do have an 808 phone number. I came here for college. I went down to Santa Clara University, right down the street. I did graduate with a finance degree. I used it a little bit in my first job. I was the first person from Santa Clara University to go directly into management consulting, straight from undergrad. So I did about 4 years at PwC. I did my first stint in accounting and finance management consulting, and then I ended in corporate strategy and go-to-market consulting. And then I made another career switch over to Google, where I currently work as a recruiter right now. And that's when I also started my career coaching business called Career Shakers. We do live seminars a lot like these. We also do individual coaching. We do specialize in career changes or job shifts, which is kind of where our name came from. And so really excited to connect with everyone today. Still looks like everyone's still feeling shy. No one wants to do any intros, but that's just a little bit about me. That's a little parrot that landed on my shoulder when I was visiting Austin for work. But yeah, so why don't we dive on into the presentation here. We do have some general interviewing tips. So, and this is stuff I like to set as a ground rule. just to set a baseline and a foundation. So the first thing is leverage your recruiter. I know this is common sense, but I think there's a lot of misconceptions out there about us as recruiters. People feel like if you ask us questions, we'll judge you or it'll count negatively towards your overall application experience. But one thing that I think is good to know is that as a recruiter, we are compensated as well as measured on the number of people that we hire. So it is in 100% our best interest to help prepare you for your interviews. So if you do have questions, like what are the different types of questions I'm going to get, right? Like who am I meeting with? What are they looking for? Definitely utilize us to the best of your ability. Don't overutilize us. We don't want to be called and texted by you all the time, but definitely don't be afraid to reach out to your recruiter. The second one is use your resume as a study guide, especially for the behavioral questions. I'll explain what behavioral questions are in a little bit, but basically you should be able to walk through all of the different bullets on your resume one by one and explain articulately in a structured format to an interviewer what it was you were doing on that project. And so for some of you who are paying coaches or paying others to write your resume, I'm not saying that it's a bad thing, but just so you know, you should be prepared to explain all of the different bullets that are on your resume. Just something I wanted to call out. I always recommend to my clients that they write their own resume, because then it's almost like practice for yourself. And if you do structure it in the appropriate fashion, you're almost answering behavioral questions for you on paper. So the third one, which does seem obvious, but I feel like a lot of people say that they practice, but they're not doing it properly. I would say film yourself, face the camera towards you, set it at eye level. I'm going to be posting a video on my YouTube channel later on this week to walk you through how to practice, but essentially definitely film yourself. It should be between 3 and 5 minutes total. No less than 3, no more than 5, just as a gauge to start. And you can actually start to build up your question bank as you do more interviews, which is kind of the last point here. Especially if you apply consistently for the same jobs over time, you will notice that you're going to get the same questions or the same versions of questions. So I would write those down after all your interviews, and then that's how you can actually start to practice and build up tips over time. Okay, let's just check the chat real quick here.
We don't have any questions yet, but we have gone over 50 people. So we're over the half-century mark. Congratulations.
Awesome. Yeah, welcome everybody.
Yeah, just as a reiteration, if you have a question, if you have thoughts, if you have a really hard interview question that you encountered lately, put it all in the comments section. We want to hear about it. This is an engaging and interactive live session. And so we want to work together to help all of you succeed at your next job interview.
Yeah, let's do it. It's much more fun when we all get to interact and you don't just have to listen to one person like me talk at you the whole time.
We just went over 60 people. This is amazing. I think this is the most attended Albert's List Live ever.
Nice. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for coming.
Yeah.
Thank you for tuning in. We love it. We love it. All right. So thank you so much for coming. This is great. I'll see you guys all. No, I'm just kidding. Just kidding. So hopefully you found that a little bit helpful, but now we're going to get into like the meat and potatoes. Basically what we're going to cover. This is like my form of also of like a mini agenda. We're going to cover basically all the different types of interview questions that you could possibly encounter when you're interviewing. This is from both corporate jobs all the way through like software engineering, management consulting, etc. So we're going to go through them in order of difficulty. I've got easiest on the left, hardest on the right. Just real quick through them all. So behavioral questions, 100% guaranteed. You're going to get multiples of these no matter what company you're applying for. They basically are the ones that ask you about your experience. So they usually start with like, tell me about a time, or walk me through an example, or can you explain? That's any behavioral question. We'll go through next on each different slide how to answer all of these and how to practice, but just real quick what each of these are. Research-based questions. This is a term that I came up with. I don't know what other coaches or people call them, but basically the questions that are like, tell me about yourself, or why do you want to work here? What's your greatest weakness? These types of questions, I call them research questions because you basically have to do research about either the company, the industry, the job, yourself, in order to appropriately answer them. And so that one I'll cover second. Technical questions. This is basically for the software engineers in here, the data analysts, the management consultants. There's going to be some form of technical aptitude test that you'll have to go through. Each company has different versions of it, but we'll just run through quickly about how those work. The next one is the hypothetical question. A lot of the larger companies these days, Google, Apple, Facebook, Amazon, Oracle, I'm sure, we all use versions of hypothetical questions. Sometimes they are geared specifically around your technical domain expertise. Sometimes they're just general cognitive, like I would say problem solving questions. And they basically will put you in a hypothetical scenario that may be related to your job. It'll sound like, imagine I hired you tomorrow and I asked you to do blank. How would you solve this problem? Or how would you get this project done? Or how would you do this? So that's getting to be a really, really common question. It's my second hardest one because you never know what these questions are going to be. Unlike the research-based ones, like you always know they're going to ask you, walk me through your resume, tell me about yourself. So these are a little bit harder to predict, and that's why I have them closer to the end, but definitely something you want to be prepared for. And then lastly is the brain teaser questions. These are by far the hardest. Good news is almost no companies use these anymore, except like McKinsey, Bain, BCG. So I was trying to see in the chat if there's anyone who is a management consultant or is trying to get into management consulting, because then I can kind of tailor the presentation and see which slides to like spend more time on or less time. But I don't see anyone quite yet. So the brain teaser one, we may just go over very, very briefly, just because probably not a lot of you will run into these, hopefully. Okay. So I'll just see if there's any questions. I will get into how to answer all of these coming up, but I'll just pause and see if there's any questions right now.
Yeah, we have a really shy crowd tonight.
You know what it is, I think, Albert? Everyone is like so good at interviewing that they don't even have questions.
Yeah. I mean, maybe they can answer how many, I remember
Golf
getting an
balls.
interview question, how many phone books, how would I figure out how many phone books are in all of Manhattan? I think eBay asked me this question about 9 years ago, and I totally had no idea how to answer it, and I just kind of fumbled my way through the question. Thankfully, they don't ask it anymore. So, yeah, thankfully.
Yeah, thankfully, right? Thankfully.
Yeah.
All right, cool. So let's get into some of this good stuff here, which I'm sure you're all excited to get into. So first things first, this is the behavioral question. I would love to see in the chat type yes if you, or type yes or Y if you are already familiar with the STAR technique. It's pretty famous and popular. And N for no if you've never heard of it, just because I'll know if I should take my time and go through this or if I should just kind of breeze through it since we're all experts here at interviewing, apparently. But basically, the STAR technique or the STAR structure, STAR, it's an acronym. This is essentially how you should be structuring your answer for any behavioral type question. So if you hear, tell me about a time, you should be thinking STAR. I have a little diagram on the left that I created myself with a little bit of Photoshop. You can kind of think of it kind of like a funnel. So you would start really, really broad with your scenario and give background and context, and then you would just get slightly more and more specific as you get down towards your result and essentially answering the question that was asked to you. So just kind of have that mental picture in your brain as you're working through how to go about answering a question. Essentially, what you want to do is first give some context about what the situation was, basically set the stage. If you are trying to change careers or switch jobs right now, the S or the situation is where you would basically explain how your current role, even though not directly related to the job, has like transferable skills, or you're trying to highlight something that would be beneficial in your next role. So that's just something to keep in mind. The next comes the task. This is essentially when you're going to walk the interviewer through what you were actually doing as a part of that project. This is also usually when you explain how you're about to answer the question. So you give some context first, and then you say, okay, let me now tell you why I'm using this example to answer your question. Next is your actions. So this is where you actually demonstrate your technical or role-related knowledge or domain expertise. This is when you would walk them through, not necessarily step by step, but walk them through the steps of what you did to essentially complete your project. If you are able to demonstrate like the ability to look at two different options, or you had to make a decision, and then you walk the interviewer through how you ultimately picked one, that's a really good way to demonstrate your overall domain expertise. And then lastly, but most importantly, is your result. This is the one that interviewers and hiring managers basically make hiring decisions based on. Is how you essentially are able to demonstrate how you are able to benefit the business, help others, or essentially like add value. And so I highly recommend that of all these components, your R is the most buttoned up and the one that you focus on the most. Try to use numbers where possible. It's not always about revenue or making money. Sometimes it's more about like leadership skills or things like that. But yeah, I'll just pause here and see if anyone has any questions.
We actually have a lot of questions. So while we were busy not refreshing our chat window, we have about 45 comments actually on this.
Oh, so I have to refresh this? Is that how it works?
Yeah. And also you'll notice underneath your Zoom, underneath your face, that there's this little gray box. If you want to go ahead and minimize that so that folks can see more of the slides, that I think will also help.
Under my face is a like this thing.
Yeah. Do you see the gray box in the Facebook Live?
The gray box in the Facebook Live. Oh,
yeah.
Is that better? I can't tell.
We'll see in a moment here. We'll see in a moment. So let's see. There's definitely some questions here. We got some cool people though. We got a product manager, social media moderator. Sarah's in recruiting and marketing at Northwestern Mutual. Armand is a market business and market analytics manager at Calbright College. Lynn is getting her master's degree at UC Davis. And Jeff here, he's a product marketing manager. Let's see, who else do we have here? Van is a data analyst.
Wow, look at that. It's quite a wide variety.
Yeah. And I think we can see your screen now, so it's really great. All right, so there is actually a couple of questions here too that I believe were asked early on. So here we go. Let's see. Nina asks, how do you answer the question, what is a technology that you use that is marketed badly? I've gotten this a few times, and it seems like the technology I use in this example isn't what the interviewer expected.
Interesting.
That's a very specific question. Maybe we pin that a little bit later. What do you think?
Yeah, that sounds good. I would also love to get some context about the role that you're applying for, or kind of what your background and experience is. So I guess that kind of leads nicely into like some, I guess, advanced interviewing tips or techniques as it relates to the behavioral questions. Everything I've covered so far is, I would say, like fundamentals. I would not try and do anything more advanced than that until you kind of nail your STARs. When you are practicing, one thing I recommend is when you're recording yourself, I would talk out loud. So I would say literally like, the situation was blank, the task was blank. And then as you get more comfortable with the structure and technique, you just remove that from your vocabulary, and then it'll just start to flow a whole lot smoother. And this is not like a written rule. You don't have to do STAR. This is just a way to structure your answer that's easy to follow. There's also the CAR technique, which people may have heard, or people who've gone to business school may have heard. They're both kind of interchangeable. I like this one better because it's more specific, but it's not a written rule. In terms of advanced stuff, so first thing is, and I've seen this with people at all levels, like entry level all the way up to VP, do not use the same example more than one time during any of your interviews. Now, I know it's going to be hard, especially for those of you who don't have that much experience. You're probably thinking like, well, I've only had one job, or I've only been working for like 6 months or a year. There's not that much that I can talk about. You're going to need to really think about all the different projects and things that you've done. And those of you who have a lot of experience, and I've fallen into this too, you know that there's like 1 or 2 really awesome projects that you've done that are really impressive, and you always bring them up. And so a lot of people think, oh, it's a different interviewer. They won't know that I've already said this. Now, a lot of companies these days, everyone takes notes and everyone shares notes. And so especially at the more senior levels, they want to see a breadth of experience, not just you using the same example multiple times. So that's just kind of something to think about.
Excellent. And the person who is asking that question is looking for a product marketing manager job on the senior level. So something good to think about later. Chet asks, how do you get a sense of the scope of technical questions before the interview? I get surprised by the technical questions being asked and I don't perform well as I like. I think that's actually a really great question for the technical section. So I think we can hold off on that. And then Armand asks a more general question. He asks, as a recruiter, what are the job insights you're seeing on the ground in this moment of crisis? What companies are expanding? What areas are hiring freezing, etc.?
So in terms of what I see right now, larger companies or folks at larger companies are currently planning on staying. They're definitely not trying to make any moves or take any risk right now, especially if they're at like the Microsofts or the Amazons of the world, just because likelihood of them having excess cash. Apple, for example, statistically probably have a greater probability of keeping your job even during a recession. And we've noticed that the smaller companies or startups have started to panic a little bit, and there are already doing layoffs. And so just from my perspective, that's kind of what I've seen. So if you are looking for work, I would target the larger companies if possible, because they probably will have the best chance. And then the question about how do you know what types of technical interview questions to be prepared for, I would reference my first tip, which is definitely leverage your recruiter. They should be helping you prepare and be aware of what types of questions you're going to be getting, what types of case study questions you'll have to do. Are they timed? Are they giving them to you in advance? What type of SQL knowledge do they expect you to have? That type of stuff. So I would definitely leverage your recruiter if possible. Again, our job is to help you get hired, because that's how we get paid. So we should definitely be helping you out there. All right. Oh, and I saw some questions in the chat asking me if I was a recruiter before I went to Google, and the answer is no. I actually got this job with no prior experience. So normally I like to do these live demos where I would bring someone up on stage and have them like walk through an example. I'd have you guys break up into individual teams and like practice on your own. But because we can't do this, also luckily for you guys, I have an expert here and a brave volunteer, Albert, who has so kindly volunteered and is willing to run through a live demo to show you guys how to use the STAR technique in a question. So
looks like a tough one. I hate these questions because I got to talk about failure. And by the way, we still have other questions, I think, going on out here.
Oh,
if
nice.
You want to address those. I don't know.
Okay.
If you,
why don't we have you go through this one first, and then
I'll go through
what
this
other
one
questions
first.
we got. So, Albert, describe a time when things didn't go according to plan, and how did you fix it?
Yeah, so I was at the last company that I worked at, which was a startup. I worked over here in the United States, and the product management team that I was liaising with was all the way out in Switzerland. And what ended up happening was that there was a miscommunication on product launch. They were busy doing their own thing. I was busy doing my thing. And we caught it just right before they launched the solution that some wires had been crossed and some processes hadn't been figured out. And so what I did to go ahead and solve that was instead of having the mixed communication that we were having, I set up weekly cadence calls with that team so that we know where we are when it comes to them on the product side and me on the marketing side.
Perfect, great. So I'll get into the questions here in a bit, but Albert did a really great job walking through. His S was really strong. He gave me a really good background of the situation. He told me what role he's going to be talking about, because Albert does have a lot of experience. So it's always good to understand which job he may be referencing and what project specifically he was doing. He did walk me through the task really nicely, easy to follow, good transition. The action was pretty clear. He was trying to basically solve a communication problem, and then the result ultimately was that I assume you fixed the communication problem at the end of it.
The communication problem was fixed. We were able to launch what we needed to launch on time and figure things out as they went on. Yeah.
Perfect. Yeah. So overall, I think it's a pretty good answer. I would probably go maybe 7.5 out of 10.
Yeah, it wasn't as well, I would say, signposted from a situation, task, action, and result perspective, but overall it kind of followed the rubric.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
So
again, I put Albert on the spot. Like he wasn't preparing for this. He's not actively practicing his interview skills to be applying right now. At least I don't think. So I think he did a really good job in terms of what I would look to potentially enhance the answer. I think for the result itself, he probably should have drove home a little bit more of like what types of changes were made. I know that he has an analytics background, so maybe a little bit of numbers. Also, would be great for him to flex a little bit on his technical expertise. I feel like he skipped over, like the technical part of kind of what he's doing and how wires may have been crossed or like what potentially would have been impacted. It would have been great to get like a little bit of sense of Albert's skill set. And then for the result itself, I think it was good. He ultimately solved the communication problem, but thinking about like scalability as well as broad solutions, I think would also have been really, really helpful. But overall, really great answer, I think. Thank you, Albert.
thank
Um,
you.
questions.
Sarah asks, what is your favorite question to ask candidates?
Oh, that's a good one. I have a lot. My favorite question to ask candidates. Honestly, I think my favorite question is, what are you looking for in your next job or company? I don't make hiring decisions based on the answer to that question, but I really like it just because it's good to understand who's kind of taking the job search seriously. If you haven't really prepared for your interview or you're just excited about the company like Google or Facebook or whatever, it'll be a very generic and sometimes boring answer like, oh, I can't wait to learn, or I'm looking for the next great opportunity, or Google is a fantastic company. That for me, I just like to see how people react and what they're really looking for. It's also really good for you as a candidate to understand what it is that you want and don't want in your next company, which I think is probably more important than what the company wants. Getting a really good understanding of either like what you want your manager to be, what you want your next role to do and not do, I think is really important. Folks who have that clear understanding of what exactly they want, I think end up doing better, just because you know what you're looking for and there's a level of practice that I think comes along with that.
Yeah, Brian, who's a friend of mine, said, I noticed that Albert didn't provide much context on the company or product for my answer. Granted, I know the story, so this question is tough. That's funny.
And I did pick a very generic question. I don't think
Yeah.
any of you guys would get this broad of a question. I picked it on purpose just because I wanted something that would be easily digestible and understandable for everyone to understand. I didn't want to like test Albert's marketing analytics skills, since not everyone is in marketing analytics. So yeah, that's just why I picked this type of a question.
Here's another one. Here's another question that we think we can ask when we get into the technical piece. Bena says, what if we want to interview for a new field of technical job that we do not have any direct experience in? Okay.
Yeah, so technical roles itself are quite difficult to make transitions in because they are by definition technical. So like there's a lot of folks who want to get into software engineering or data analytics, right? So if you don't have a fundamental understanding of SQL or Java or Python or whatever language you need to actually understand to execute the role, that by itself is already a blocker. However,
Yeah.
the good news is with the world today, a lot of companies are getting really progressive. They don't require like 4-year official degrees in a lot of these fields anymore. You can take like a 6-week Udemy course, right, in SQL or product management sometimes, and that may honestly be good enough. I got the majority of my jobs that I technically wasn't qualified for through networking. And also like a really deep understanding of the role itself. I think if you can demonstrate that you know what the day-to-day is like and you know what gaps you have in your skills compared to what they may be looking for, but how you can make up for it in other areas, I think that's a way to kind of go about overcoming that. But if it's a technical role, like, and you need to know SQL, like you just have to know SQL. There's like no other way around it, right?
Yeah.
So
Hemengi asks, how do you answer behavioral questions such as describe your strengths and weaknesses? That's where we're going next, right?
that's where we're going next, which is a perfect transition. Gosh, it's like I paid him to ask that question.
Yeah.
So
Who
I would
knows?
actually qualify that one as a research-based question.
Yeah.
And just to start, because everyone gets confused all the time, you do not use the STAR technique. to answer any of these questions. So tell me about yourself. Walk me through your resume. Why do you want to work here? What do you know about the job? What's your greatest weakness? You do not use the STAR technique because it would just sound super awkward, right? If you're like, why do you want to work here? Well, the situation was I was applying for a job. The task was I applied with my resume. It just doesn't quite work. So definitely don't use the STAR technique for this. These are research-based because you need to basically understand these 4 different areas. I would say in depth. The higher level of a role you're applying for, the deeper the level of knowledge you require in each of these different areas. So the first one, right, company. This is for the why do you want to work here question, or why are you leaving your current job type question. A lot of this stuff is really easy to find on like Glassdoor and the company's websites and things like that. The second one, you really need to understand the job itself that you're applying for, even if it has the same exact job title that you're doing right now. You definitely want to understand what specifically you're applying for, how this may be different, what this team is looking for that maybe you don't have. And then the third one is the industry itself or your competitors. If you are, I would say, director level and above, number 3 is basically what they're hiring you for. That's where they're basically spending all their money, is to get your understanding of the market landscape, their strengths and weaknesses, their competitors, their suppliers, their customers. So I would definitely want to make sure, especially at the senior levels, that you have a really in-depth understanding of the industry and competitors. And you're probably thinking to yourself, well, Corey, if I'm applying to like 20 companies, this is so much homework. This is just ridiculous. And so to you, I would say definitely don't apply to like shotgun your resume out there to like 20 different companies, especially if they're all in different industries. I would try and hone your search first. That way you can actually start to build up a really good database of talking points and research that's kind of transferable and leverageable over time. And then lastly, and most importantly, you need to understand yourself. Especially your key differentiators are kind of what makes you different than everyone else. And this is where I push a lot of people to, is thinking about what makes you great at your job versus just average, right? So let's take a sales example, because everyone understands sales no matter what you do. So let's say you're applying for a sales manager job, and your big takeaway is that you were able to exceed your quota by like $1 million each year. Like, yes, that's impressive, but like that's what everyone who's applying for a sales job is going to say, that they were able to exceed their sales goal. So how are you going to be different, or how are you going to show that you're a much better sales manager than every other sales manager who exceeds their quota? So that's the difference between, like, I would say, like an average understanding of your skills versus like knowing how you're great or the best at something. And also, you also want to make sure that you're fully aware of your, I would say, gaps, either in your experience or kind of what you're looking for. So for example, let's say they're looking for someone who's managed a team of 10, and currently you only manage a team of 5. To you, that's not a big deal. You're halfway there. What's 5 more people? But to that company, that could be a huge difference. And so you need to understand how you can make up for some of these gaps that you may have in other ways, right? And so I think that's also really important. Okay, let me just refresh the chat on my side here and see.
Yeah, we've had a lot of extra questions just asked. So let's see. Van says, I had an experience where 3 interviewers asked me the same set of questions. I kept in mind that the new interviewer did not know what I said earlier, but it was hard to come up with new content each time. I know they compare notes, but the questions were all about metrics that can be applied to a scenario. What is the best way to handle this?
So in total honesty, I think sometimes people accidentally ask the same question multiple times.
Mm-hmm.
I know that I've had my interviewers accidentally ask the same question. So first, I would say you should always call it out and just say, in a very nice way, right? Like, hey, just wanted to let you know that so-and-so I just interviewed with also asked me the same question. Would you like me to use the same example but expand on it? Or is there a reason you're asking me to go over this topic again? That's definitely something I would say first off, right off the bat, because sometimes they may even just tell you like, oh my goodness, I'm so sorry. I shouldn't have asked you that question. Because if you think about it from a recruiting perspective, if you ask the same question 3 different times, you don't really learn anything new about you. So I highly doubt that it was on purpose. So that's the first thing. The second thing, let's just say it is happening on purpose. That's basically, I think, in my opinion, they're trying to really assess your overall expertise in the field and looking at how many different strong examples you have that you can provide. If you know that you've only got like one or two really awesome kick-ass projects, and come the third time you got nothing else, to them that's probably signaling that you either haven't done enough, or maybe you need to start doing some self-reflection, maybe thinking about like what other things you could be doing at work to get on more impactful or meaningful projects.
Great. Martin says, in interview rounds for a product manager role, I have the feeling that they're only looking for really complex solutions that you've created in the past. If it comes to new products, I believe it's key to keep it simple, stupid. However, I don't have a feeling I score points with that kind of answer. What is your vision on this?
Well, how do you know that they only want highly complex answers? I guess that would be like the first thing. I think you probably would need to kind of strike that balance, right? Because as a product manager, you need to be able to straddle both engineering as well as the business. And so while engineering sometimes like to get really complex and technical, but the business just cares about like, how do I sell this, or how do I market this, or what's your project plan? I think as a product manager, you do have to be able to kind of balance and tiptoe on that line between the complex and simple. I would actually love to hear what your current responses are to some of those questions, and then we can find a way to kind of tweak and adjust it.
Sounds good. And then Jovine finally says he's got a lot of experience in QA. He's trying to go from somewhere where he's more senior into something more entry level, and he's wondering how to explain that to people who are interviewing him.
Is it for like a career type of switch? Because then I feel like that story is pretty easy to kind of convey. And if you're wondering like why they would be concerned about that, I think they might just be trying to assess like your motivation in terms of like why you would potentially want a role like that, or what you're trying to learn from them. So I would just try and figure out what it is that you're trying to get into right now. If it is a career switch, I think it's totally normal for you to kind of have to reset every once in a while, and I think that's totally fine. Honestly, I think it's admirable. I'm really proud of you. I think that's great.
Cool. All right. Well, keep the questions coming, everybody. We appreciate the engagement and interaction. And yeah.
All right. So Albert, are you ready for your next question?
Oh boy, hit me.
All right, Albert, tell me about yourself. And I guess before you get into this, we should probably give the folks in the chat some background, right, about what you currently do today.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I'm a content marketing manager, product marketing manager hybrid, serving as sort of an interlocutor between different members of my team, including product management, customer success, and sales, to develop compelling content that drives interested parties to buy our product. Wow, that was really wordy and terrible.
It was a good sales pitch, though.
It was a good sales pitch. Wow, yeah, no, when you catch me on the spot here, it's actually kind of hard, but I guess what I should say is I'm a SaaS content marketing manager who's worked at a variety of startups, large companies, and also run my own business. And I have experience in everything from developing content to presenting to sales and enabling sales to doing digital marketing and really kind of tying the end-to-end marketing bow together.
Nice.
Yeah.
That's great.
I hope everybody gets a good laugh out of that.
I think that was probably like really good amount of time too. I think it was probably somewhere between 20 and 30 seconds, which is like the perfect amount of time frame. There's actually like nothing I wanted to comment on Albert's answer. I just wanted to hear him talk about himself.
I'm sure everybody wants to hear me talk about myself, right? Yeah.
So overall, in terms of this question itself, and we're going to get into some of the advanced stuff here for a second. Essentially, what you want to ask yourself is, like, for any research-based question, is what's the purpose of this question and what are they trying to understand? Anytime someone asks you this, what they're basically asking is, why are you the most qualified or the best person that I should hire for my role based on what I need right now? And to Albert's situation. I didn't set them up this way on purpose. But essentially, what I would recommend is anytime you get asked this, either from your recruiter or your hiring manager, make them go first. So I would actually turn it around first, ask them what it is that they're looking for in this role, or what it is that this role entails, or the responsibilities, because you want to tailor your answer or your pitch to that specific job. So, for example, let's say we'll just do like a general sales manager job again, because everyone knows that, right? If you were applying for a sales manager role and you go first and you're like, so right now I manage a team of 5, my yearly quota revenue target is $1 million. And, I have international experience both in the US as well as Canada. And prior to this, I was also a sales manager at another SaaS company, right? And then the interviewer goes, oh, well, that's great. But, for this position, I need someone that's managed a team of like 10 or greater. And also your quota is going to be closer to like $10 million. And you're going to be working with not just North America, but also LATAM, Europe, as well as APAC. You're going to have to manage a global team. So I don't quite think you're what I'm looking for. And now you're on the back foot, right? You have to be like, oh, no, actually, I have managed larger teams. I just didn't know that that's what you wanted. Or no, I have international experience. It's just, it was 2 jobs ago. So I would say, where possible, have them go first and then kind of tailor your answer or response around that. So, okay, I'll pause because I'm sure I'm going to get lit up with questions.
Yeah.
Right now.
Anush asks, do you ever ask questions about weaknesses? What is the best answer to these types of questions? I know the strengths and weaknesses question, and I'll go ahead and I guess say something here, is that I always see that one as a trick question. The one that I always said was my greatest strength is that like I'm a team player, and I haven't been asked this question in years, but I'm a team player. I'm very collaborative, and I want to see other people succeed just as much as myself. And my greatest weakness is that I'm an overthinker. I spend a lot of time on projects, but that's because I want to make sure that I'm doing it right and ensuring that there are fewer levels of reviews prior to the project becoming complete. And so that's the trick question, where you take your negative and you turn it into a positive, in my experience, at least. If you actually talk about a weakness, then I'm really curious to hear how you answer that question without shooting yourself in the foot.
No, I think you did the right thing. You should pick a weakness that's not, I would say, critical to the job, because that's definitely not something that would help you in any way. But yeah, to Talbert's point, pick something that's somewhat related but not a critical component of the role, and then you should demonstrate that you're working on it in some fashion. And like, you basically have to show them that you've acknowledged it's a weakness and how you are trying to overcome that.
Yeah.
So.
Cool. Jen asks, I missed a good chunk of the video. How do you explain a large gap in employment?
Yeah, so I would try to find a way, first off, on your resume to kind of explain that. Either like you could say parental leave is something that I've seen a lot of people use, or personal time off. But I think as long as you have like a good reason as to why you have some time off, assuming you weren't like fired or you just wanted to play video games or something. Most companies now, especially here in the Bay, they're all pretty progressive. And I feel like you should probably be all right as long as you're able to kind of explain either why you did it and or how you're working, basically show how you're working to get back into the workforce after so many years. One of the biggest concerns that people have when you do take extended periods of time off is that your skill set is no longer relevant. And so as long as you're able to demonstrate that, yes, you have been keeping up, whether that's through classes or working for free or doing something like that, you're going to need to basically show them that you are committed to getting back into the workforce and that your skills are still relevant today. So either if you can talk about it or show it, that's how I would go about overcoming that. But,
cool.
Yeah.
Armand says, you previously spoke about alternative experience. How do you feel about alternative credentials like online certifications? Do those have any value, or do you look silly putting it on a resume?
I think it depends on what you're applying for, but honestly, I don't really think it matters all that much unless it's a highly technical certification. Like if you were to get, I would say like a project management certification or like a product manager certification, it's very different than actually being a project manager or being a product manager. So those I would say I really kind of dismiss. But if you have
I echo
something
that
more
on the
technical,
marketing side too, because it's like,
yeah,
you know, you can go and get all the different HubSpot certifications that exist out there, but
yeah,
what happens actually in the field when you put together an email or create an inbound marketing strategy is so different, so different.
yeah. And but like for the more technical stuff, like and this is something that I feel like is unprecedented today. Like when my parents were in school, it all that mattered was, do you have a college degree and like what did you study in school? These
Yeah.
days, you can get a job at Amazon, Google, Facebook by taking a 6-week coding boot camp. Like that's just unheard of. Like you don't even need to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars to get a degree anymore, as long as you can like pass a coding boot camp. It's totally crazy. So on the technical
Well,
side,
I have a little bit of a caveat to that. So we've had threads about that in this community before. And the biggest challenge that recruiters have about bootcamp grads is that they all have the same projects. And
mhm,
so if you can stand out by having a different project than what you were assigned in that bootcamp, then you're going to do a lot better for yourself. Otherwise, you're going to just be the same cookie cutter candidate that doesn't make it through.
yeah.
Yeah.
But to kind of add on to that, and this also goes to my first point with the certifications for like project management or product management. I think for those, if you're trying to make that switch, you have to have tangible work experience. That's been the biggest differential. And I know the question is always, well, Corey, how do I get experience when I don't have experience? And to that, I would say you need to work for free. So keep your day job, and I would hustle a little bit on the side, like come to Albert's list, check out the jobs that are being posted, find a startup that could use like a free PM in training, essentially. I would try and work for free. Maybe you have family friends who own small businesses. Maybe you start your own business. You can get your experience that way.
Mhm.
I think if you want it bad enough, you'll find a way to like hustle and make it work. The biggest thing and the biggest takeaway is always you need to be able to show them that you either have the skills or are getting the skills, as opposed to just saying that you've done online projects and things like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, two more questions, and then we're gonna keep going because we're actually almost an hour into this. Um, are you flexible on time? Can we do this for a little while longer?
Oh yeah, I'm flexible on time as long as everyone wants to stay and finds it entertaining. So yeah.
We're all quarantined, so what else do we got to do, right? Danish asks, was it an easy transition into recruiting compared to where you were prior to when you were, I guess, in accounting and management consulting?
Yes, but I think that's just because of the skill set that
Mhm.
was that's required. It's slightly different, but I think for me personally, it was different. It was easy, and I'm an extrovert, which I think also helps.
Mhm, mhm, mhm.
So yeah, and overall, like as a technical skill set, unfortunately, recruiting is not as technical as my other job. So yeah, I think it was a pretty easy transition.
Okay. And then Jeffrey says, how do you answer the question, what do you like the least about your current role?
Oh yeah, that's like a really evil question, because basically you don't want to down talk your employer, your current employer, in any way. And I know that that can be really tempting, especially when they set you up with that type of question.
Yeah.
Or like, why are you looking to leave? Or why do you want to come here? A lot of people revert to the negative. And so that's definitely a trick question. I would flip it around and talk more about like why you're excited to be at this company or why you're excited for this opportunity, which again, I'm going to go back to this slide, right? You need to be able to talk about either the company itself, the industry itself.
Mhm.
I would avoid you. Don't make this about yourself. Everyone always makes it about themselves. The question or the answer that I hate the most is when they're like, oh, I have no room for growth here. I feel capped. And so I want to come to your company where there's room for growth, because then it's all about you. And then that's not what people really want to hear. Yeah.
Let's just throw in one more question. Are many times Jovine says many times the interviewers are very young folks. Are there any challenges applying for companies which have young blood? Okay, youth
Uh,
question.
I think it kind of goes both ways, honestly, because if they're young, they haven't done a lot of interviews. So that can be good or bad. It's good because they don't have some of those biases of folks who've been interviewing for tens and twenties of for like 10 and 20 years, where they pick up on small little things that don't actually matter. And so it kind of depends on like what types of interview training that they've had and what biases they may have coming into the role itself. I've noticed that younger hiring managers have less of a bias towards ageism, both upwards and downwards.
Mhm.
And so I think that's definitely an advantage compared to if you were applying for someone like my parents' age. If my mom was interviewing you, she would definitely have some ageism. Sorry, mom. So I think that there's pros and cons in terms of like that type of company culture, and it's also
Yeah.
something to think about as well. Is when you're applying there, like, is that a company you would want to work at? Typically, younger companies, they do tend to work more like startups. So if you're someone who wants that like work-life balance, mm, that's just kind of something to think about. And are you okay reporting to someone who may have 5 to 10 less years of experience than you? So that's also something to think about.
Makes sense. All right, we have a couple more questions here, but I think we want to keep the line moving. So feel free
Cool.
to head in your next section,
All right.
and we'll
So
answer those questions in the next break.
yeah. So I saw quite a few analysts, data analysts, PMs in here. So I'll stick more to the right side of the screen as opposed to the left. I didn't see anyone in management consulting, which breaks my heart. I know that there's not a whole lot of us, but in terms of this one, so this is where basically like your coding tests, right? There's a lot of really good resources out there. Leak Code. What's this new one I heard of? Codility. Basically, it's like Leak Code, but there's timed versions of the exams. And then I learned of a cool one recently too. It's called PRAMP, PRAMP. As far as I know, it's free, but you can get free personalized like video coding coaches. I don't know how they make money from it. If it's free for you, maybe you're solving like business problems or something, and then they just take your data and give it. I don't know. But PRAMP is something you guys should definitely look into. For these coding tests, again, ask your recruiter, right? Like what types of tests you're going to be getting. Are they timed? Do you have to whiteboard? Do you get a computer? Each company is essentially different. But I had this in the middle in terms of difficulty, just because it is a technical test. So it's pretty black and white. Like you'll kind of know right away if you bombed or passed, as opposed to if you interviewed and they asked you, tell me about yourself, and you feel like you gave a really good answer and then they still reject you. Those are always hard to kind of gauge where you didn't do well and did do well. And so that's why I have this one kind of in the middle. Overall, I would just say practice makes perfect. Use a lot of the free resources you have, and then you'll probably take it from there. I didn't see anyone in management consulting. That one is less technical. It's more about like business concepts. And the example I have in the slide, because I don't have an engineering background, is not a coding test. It's a consulting framework. But yeah, and I'll just pause here and see if anyone, I guess, has questions. I don't have a software engineering degree, so I don't know how much help I'll be able to give you if you ask me about like arrays and different joins and things like that. But yeah, happy to open it up for questions.
I don't see any software engineering specific questions, but Martin did ask again, what is the best way to understand what they're looking for in a candidate, and when is the best moment to ask? I have the feeling that you mostly get an obvious answer that doesn't help you. And then Sky was commending you for helping her think differently about the tell me about yourself question.
Oh, thank
So,
you, Sky. I appreciate that.
cool.
So I think the question was, when do you ask them to talk about the role? Is that right?
Let's see. What is the best way to understand what they're looking for in a candidate, and when is the best moment to ask? That's the question. Yep.
Oh, I think if you're given the opportunity to ask questions at the beginning when you're talking to the hiring manager or the recruiter, it's always best to ask early, because that way you get an understanding of what they're looking for, and then you would basically tailor your pitch to fit that description. Or you should be ready to have counter arguments ready for if there's anything that they're looking for that you don't have directly. Maybe you have transferable skills or something like that. So I would say earlier is always better.
All right. I don't see any other questions. So if we want to just keep moving,
Cool.
let's do that. But if you do have questions and you're watching and maybe you disagree with something, let us know. I'd like to,
Yeah.
we'd like to hear it.
Yeah, this one I'm not going to have Albert do, especially since there's no management consultants in the chat. But
Yeah.
basically, this is something you would get if you were applying for like a Deloitte, KPMG, McKinsey, Bain, etc. You just need to understand what the formula is for gross profit, what basically makes up revenue and what makes up cost of goods sold, and then you would basically just walk them through how you would figure this out. But we'll skip this one.
It's a really let's stay on this one real quick, because I think that even if you don't have that management consulting background, when I've interviewed at Google, even for like content or product marketing roles, I've gotten questions that are kind of somewhat like this. I'm not allowed to probably reveal what questions you guys ask at Google, but in essence, it would be if you were to like take another company, like say, you know, Microsoft gives away a lot of its solutions for free, and including Hotmail and, you know, and maybe some of its low cost products like Office. If you were to want to raise the prices on one of these products, what would you raise it on and why? So things like that. And I think that's actually a pretty good, just I think general thinking question, because, or even if you wanted to be even more simpler and say, you know, Facebook gives away most of its platform for free, period. If you were to start charging for Facebook, what would you charge for and why would you charge for it? You know, things like that. So, and I think it's really good for creative thinking. It's really good for seeing how somebody does think through something, even though it may never happen. You know, Facebook being paid, so things like that. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's very similar. I mean, like the hypothetical questions, which we'll get into in a second, and the case study ones, there's definitely overlap. And yeah, I think like it's basically like mirror images of each other, essentially, with slightly different approaches. But yeah.
Yeah.
So should we do the next one, which I feel like
let's do it.
All right. So this one is starting to become really popular here in the Valley, at all levels, like executive down. There's always going to be some form of hypothetical question, sometimes technical, sometimes just more like general problem solving, like kind of the ones Albert just ran through right now. But these can even be turned into technical questions. Like when I was applying for my recruiting positions, they were like, imagine I told you to hire a software engineering manager with 10 to 15 years of experience that knows Java, C++, and has to have worked at a cloud company. How would you go about, structuring your LinkedIn search and like putting together an offer, right? So it could be technical like that as it relates to your role, or it could be just general knowledge, which we'll get into an example here later on. But basically, there's 4 things that you should think about when you're running through this type of question. So the first one is ask your clarifying questions up front before you start to dive in. I would say to keep it between 2 and 3 questions. Don't do any more, because then it'll just seem like you're fishing for an answer if you just constantly keep asking questions. They definitely want you to think out loud and walk them through your thought process for all of these different types of questions. So everyone's natural instinct is, oh, I've done this before, so let me just tell you how I did it. No, I would say pause. Ask your clarifying questions, gather your information, and then start to solution it. And number 2, which I think is a big one that a lot of people miss, is structure your answer around key themes, ideas, or steps. And so let me give you an example that kind of highlights both of these. So let's say the question was, imagine I hired you to work here and I needed you to open up a zoo. How would you go about doing this? Right. And I know a lot of you are freaking out, right? Like, I'm not a zookeeper. Like, I'm not applying for a zoo job. Like, why would they ask me this? You may get some version of this just because they want to see how you work under pressure, like Albert's point, and also like how you're able to structure your answers. And so for this one example of a bad clarifying question to ask would be, oh, can I build the zoo anywhere? It's a bad clarifying question to ask because that's the whole point of the question, is they want you to like walk them through where you would build this zoo. So asking them that question would basically be a waste. Now, in terms of structuring your answer around key themes or steps. So if I'm going to build a zoo, there's definitely at least 3 major components I'd want to think of. The first is finances. Like, how much is it going to cost? What's my budget? Second is going to be the operations. Like, what animals am I going to get? Am I going to have like an aquarium or not have an aquarium? And then third, because I work in human resources, would be the people element. If you work in finance or marketing or sales, right, then your third one would be basically marketing or sales. And then you would say, well, and then lastly, I want to make sure that, how many zookeepers am I going to hire? What am I going to pay them? Who manages zookeepers? Things like that. Now the interviewer knows what 3 different sections you're going to walk them through in that order, right? Finance, operations, HR. So now there's a clear structure and path. What you've also done is you've bought yourself about 45 seconds to keep thinking of what you're going to do to explain finance as you explain these different key themes and steps. Now, the third one, which is something a little bit more advanced, but you can use assumptions to basically modify your example to play in your favor. So let's say there's a question that's like, imagine you were working on a report for your VP. And the morning that the report is due, you find out that there's an error in the report. What would you do to fix this? Right? If you have a marketing background, you can say, oh, can I assume that this is I don't know what marketing reports you use all the time, but pick some marketing report that you basically have to run every single week, right? Can I assume it's a online conversion metric report for our online store? And they say, yes, you can assume that. That's great, because now you've basically turned this situation into something you're now familiar with, almost like a behavioral question. So then you can say, okay, so if it's a report related to conversion rates, I know that my inputs generally come from X, Y, and Z system, or X, Y, and Z teams. So I would first go to those teams and figure out like where the error may be coming from, and then triage from there. So that's like one example of a way to kind of modify the overall prompt to play to your background. And then the last one, which tripped me up the first time I started doing these types of questions, is be prepared for the interviewer to build on top of your answer, or basically ask you really detailed follow-up questions. And so sometimes, like when someone asks you a hard question, you just make up something and then you're like, yeah, this is the answer. And then you never expect them to go, oh, well, tell me more about that. Why would you want to do this and not this? And then you're like, oh, shoot, I never thought you would ask me that. So definitely be very mindful of the routes that you pick as you walk through your scenario, and be prepared for them to change key variables, right? So in my zoo example, they could be like, okay, great. Now imagine you only had 7 days to open up a zoo. How would your approach change that way? And then you would answer it. And then they would go, okay, imagine I gave you 10 years to open up a zoo, the best zoo. How would you do it then? Right? So be prepared for them to basically keep building on top of things. All right. Questions?
Cool. We have several questions. Two people asked, how do I answer questions around salary requirements?
Oh, so if you work in California or New York, the good news is legally, all employers now and recruiters are required to give you a range of the role, salary range, I should say, which is helpful for some companies and not helpful for companies like Amazon. Mm-hmm. So I would have them go first, and then I would never basically say what you want until the very end of everything. Yeah.
Wesley says, I'm an engineer, boot camp grad with over a decade of sales experience. He figures that's going to set him apart, but is that actually something that people are looking for, or should he focus more on his coding abilities?
What role is he applying for again?
He wants to become a developer, but he's got over a decade of sales, and he's wondering if he should market his sales abilities more, or whether he should market his coding, focus on coding.
Oh, interesting. Well, it is a highly technical role, so unfortunately, almost all of your experience now needs to basically be shifted to be more relevant to coding. So unless you were like doing technical sales, or like you were a sales engineer, I would say it's really not that transferable, unfortunately. So I would say first I would understand why you want to make this type of switch. It's pretty drastic, especially with 10 years of experience. Maybe the easier switch would be to do sales engineering or something like on the product or like the PM side or product side. Just because one thing I've noticed is there have been some folks in sales who've been able to transition over to PM roles, product manager roles, just because they have such in-depth knowledge, not only of their product, but the strengths and weaknesses of their competitors, because you have to go to bid with all of your competitors all the time. So I have seen some folks with sales backgrounds move into product management, and then maybe from product management into an engineering role. But yeah, very interesting situation.
Yep. One more question. Armand asks, one concern I have about roles, I feel like asking about money up front is gauche. and can make me seem mercenary, but I don't want to bother going through a recruiting process if the range isn't what I'm looking for. It would waste my time and theirs. What do you recommend?
I would definitely ask for the range for the role, especially since in California and New York, we're legally required to give it to you. I think the way that you ask it, though, is really important.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. Cool. All right. That's it for now. Let's keep going.
Albert, are you ready for this next question?
Yes.
Okay. So imagine one of your direct reports was underperforming. And even if you don't manage a team, this is still an applicable question. How would you go about handling this?
Yeah, so I would go about handling this by working with them in our one-on-one, most likely discussing what the main points of underperformance stemmed from. That including where they may have gone wrong, what's might be going on in their life, and depending on their answers around that, because life is more than just work, I'd probably either recommend some course of action, whether if the course of action does stem from something in their life, perhaps see if they may want to take a couple days off or figure that out on their own, or if it came from actual performance issues at work, then maybe figuring out how to rectify the underperformance. And this would be before any performance improvement plan would be implemented. Really want to, build that trust and ensure that the report of mine doesn't feel anxious during this time, because I've been on that other side many times in my life. And we'd be, focusing on ensuring that, the person is working step by step, not missing the small details, and things related to that. And so I would take a very methodical approach, an approach that's very compassionate towards the person who was working for me, and then based on the results of that compassionate approach, decide what to do next as far as performance improvement plan, or if I've seen improvements, but maybe there's still mistakes being made, figure out what their strengths and weaknesses might be.
Great. Yeah. I think that's a really good answer. For those of you who are wondering, like, would I get this question if I'm not applying for a manager level role? The answer is probably yes, just because a lot of companies are looking to hire folks who will stay there and grow their careers. And so they would like to see, or at least get some indication of what type of manager you would be when eventually you do get those opportunities. And a lot of companies are matrixed. In other words, you heavily depend on and rely on and work with other teams, almost kind of like you were managing them, but not. And so this does have a lot of implications aside from just actually managing your own team. The good news is this is like a really great softball question. It's really easy to crush this answer like Albert did. Basically, you want to show like a mix of compassion, but also like essentially like how you would need to drop the hammer if you ultimately needed to.
Would the answer be different if I worked at a super fast-paced startup versus a larger corporation? Like if it was a cutthroat like brokerage firm where we sell stocks and do that kind of stuff all day, and my guy just wasn't doing it, would it just be like, well, in here you sink or swim. So if they're underperforming, they're gone.
Yeah, honestly,
something like that.
It could be, right. So if you do your research on the company's like culture and kind of
Yeah.
like what values to them, like for example, Amazon posted their 9 leadership principles, and so you definitely would tailor your answer different for Amazon than you would for Google. Because there's very different management philosophy approaches. Essentially, this question is basically asking you, if you're thinking about like what's the purpose of this question and why would they ask me this, they basically want to understand what type of management style you would potentially have as a manager, but also who you would best work with and if you could match their overall company culture. So definitely want to do your research again a little bit ahead of time, and then also try to find a way to structure your answer as you do walk them through this, because it is a hypothetical, so they want to understand your thought process and how you would essentially like lay out your plan. Especially if you're managing large teams, right? You definitely want to have some type of process or some type of methodical approach, so that way they actually have confidence giving you large teams, right? So we should probably pause here for questions. Dun, dun, dun.
Oh, yeah, the question that we have is, how do you answer technical questions if you're not a technical person? Other than that, we just have a couple of comments here. You're doing a
Oh,
great job.
nice. Thank you, guys.
Yeah.
It would depend on how technical of a role it
Mm.
needs to be. Um, if we had more context, if you want to just comment down below, I guess, what type of role you're applying for, maybe, and if you have directly relevant experience.
He says
Um,
he's a product manager, so I guess maybe a more technical product management role that he's trying to get into.
Got it. Got it. Okay. So I do think it depends on the overall company itself, right? If it's a software, SaaS, cloud-based company, unfortunately, a lot of us are looking for folks with engineering backgrounds. It's not a hard set rule, but that's pretty much what the marketplace looks like right now. So if you don't have that skill set and you're trying to get into software, PM, honestly, it's pretty difficult. So instead, I would target like less technical companies or less software engineering focused products, and try and break in that way. Or you will basically have to get that technical expertise. So you gotta do your coding boot camps, or try and move internally within your own company, or maybe they would be able to give you that type of shot, either on a temporary basis or full time.
Yeah, sounds
Yeah.
good. Wesley has a follow-up question. He's the sales guy who's going to become a software engineer.
Nice.
Um, I guess, yeah, should I be leveraging any of my sales experience in addition to my projects or strictly focus on my technical project work? Yeah, I think we agreed that this was probably focusing on the technical project work will probably take you further.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Maybe you can leverage your sales connections to maybe get some type of internship or work for free, maybe
yeah,
at some of these companies. You're gonna need some type of like actual projects to like walk them through outside of your coding bootcamp. So cool.
yeah.
Now, this is the last type of question. I honestly won't spend too much time on this. We'll just jump to Q&A at the end, just because I don't think a lot of you will get any of these. But if for whatever reason you do, you'll have some type of framework to lean back on. Um, very similar to the hypotheticals, ask your clarifying questions before you dive in. I would limit it to 2 or 3. Number 2 is definitely tell them that you need time to write out your approach before diving in. Everyone always just starts to like answer right away because they feel like the silence is awkward. If they're going to ask you how many golf balls fit in an airplane, you're going to need some time to walk and plan out your answer. So definitely ask for the time, and just get used to that somewhat awkward silence. Um, you're going to want to break down the larger problem into smaller problems, solve those, and then explain why you're breaking down this big problem into these tiny little ones, and then how adding them all up together essentially solves your overall problem. And lastly, try and use easy numbers to add, subtract, and multiply. A lot of these will be math-based, even though they don't actually care if you're good at math. But try to keep numbers really easy to work with. Don't overcomplicate things. I'll just run through an example real quick. So if you were asked, right, how many boxes of cereal are sold in California each year, basically what you want to do is first find some type of proxy for determining cereal. So option A is you would calculate how many grocery stores would exist in California, and then figure out maybe like how many cereals they would sell or how many customers each grocery store would have on average in California in a given year. Option B, which I think is easier, is you would just need to guesstimate how many households there are in California compared to the rest of the United States, and then assign each of those households like a certain number of cereal boxes that they would buy per year, and then you would need to adjust that based on like how big the family is, right? So basically, I think, and I did some research before this because it is my question. There's about 100 million estimated households in the United States, a nice round number. 10% of the US population is based in California. Again, a really nice number. It's not actually accurate. So therefore, 10 million houses exist in California. I would assume that a family with children would buy more boxes of cereal than a family without children. As a grown person, as a grown man during the quarantine, I'm definitely eating a lot of cereal. But I would say, like, just to keep it simple, if you are a house without kids, you buy 1 box of cereal a week. And if you are a house with kids, you would buy 2 boxes of cereal per week. So now you need to figure out how many how many homes in California would have kids versus not have kids. And I think there's some census data that says like 9 out of 10 married couples have kids. So there you go. 90% of the homes in California would buy 2 boxes of cereal a week, and then the rest would buy 1 box a week. So the math itself is pretty simple, but you need to basically break down how you would ultimately get to that math at the end of the day. Okay. Yeah, so that's pretty much all I had. We'll open it back up for questions. I only went 18 minutes over, which is pretty good considering how much Q&A we had.
Yeah, and we have a couple more questions too. So Armand asks, are there coding boot camps that have a stellar reputation? And who stands out for you as a recruiter? Or which coding boot camp stands out to you as a recruiter?
I think like some of them do have, honestly, I wouldn't worry so much about the brand name of the coding bootcamp. I would worry more so about the projects that you're going to be working on and like what you're doing in addition to going to that coding bootcamp. That's what I would really worry about. Just, there's like really popular ones now. Just pick any of them. What really matters is your real world project experience. The biggest differentiator for my clients has been actually doing like real work with real data for a company. Some of them have even worked at like tiny 5-person startups as like a free intern, but they got real business data, and that was enough for them to get opportunities at other companies like Google, Facebook, Amazon, etc. So I think you just honestly just pick any of them and focus more on what you're doing outside of school.
Awesome, cool. And then I think probably one that's very appropriate for the end is how do you end an interview? What do you say when they say anything else?
When they say anything else, I think that's your cue for like, do you have questions for me?
Yeah.
And for those,
Yep.
I would say make your questions more specific rather than broad. So, for example, the common question that people always ask, right, is like, why do you like working here? Or what's your management style? Right? Those are generic questions. Honestly, kind of boring. Everyone asks those. You never really stand out. But more importantly, that doesn't give you any information if this is the right manager for you, this is the right company or the right job. So instead, I would make it more specific. So you could say something like, I really thrive in environments where I'm given opportunities to identify problems and solve them on my own, either through programs or different types of side projects. What are examples of times when you've gotten to do projects like these? That, in my opinion, is a really good question. A, it's different. The recruiter is going to, or hiring manager is going to remember you. And B, it actually answers your question and gives you insights if you should work there or not. So that's my tip.
Excellent, excellent. Peter asks, how would you respond to a question, how much remote experience you have, and related motivation or productivity questions if you don't have much of any? So how do you?
You don't have remote working experience? Interesting.
I think he's trying to say like, how do you respond to a question asking if you've ever worked remotely, and how do you answer a question that relates to motivation and productivity when you yourself are experiencing low motivation and low productivity?
Well, just like every type of interview, right? You fake it until you make it. Yeah. So basically, if you think about what's the purpose of the question, the purpose of the question is they're understanding in these crazy times right now where you have to work from home or be onboarded from home or be managed remotely. Would you be easy to work with, or would you be productive? So basically, now that you know what they're looking for, you would basically tailor your answer now to give them assurance that you're equally as productive at work as you are at home. So something you could say is like, oh, I've never had a 100% remote role other than today when with COVID. So actually now you do have experience doing that, but let's just say COVID never happened. You could say, well, I don't have that direct experience of working 100% remotely from home. However, my company allows me to work from home once a week on Fridays. And I've noticed I'm actually way more productive when I do work from home because there are slightly less distractions for me. I'm able to block off my calendar much more appropriately. I can really focus and get my coding done or whatever. Fridays are the most productive day for me out of the week. Yada yada yada. Show them that you are way more productive working remotely than you are in the office, or equally as productive. I should say equally as productive. So that's kind of how I would spin my answer for that.
Awesome, cool. Well, thanks for staying with us 20 minutes over. We still have 40 people on the line, which is actually really amazing. I think we
Nice.
have a really engaged crowd today that learned a lot from interviewing. We'll take any final any final questions, any final questions here. But just before we hop off, do you have any final thoughts that will wrap your thoughts in a bow around what we've all learned today?
Well, firstly, I'm just really grateful for this opportunity. I've been a huge fan of the Facebook group. I think it's a great community. Everyone here has shown like great acts of kindness, and I think that is really motivating, especially in times like these. Hopefully, not a lot of you are affected by COVID and kind of what's going on with the different companies. If you are, this is definitely a great opportunity to kind of brush up on those interviewing skills. I would say if I'm going to wrap this up in a bow, interviewing is honestly a skill. Which means it can be improved and practiced and built on over time. I wouldn't shy away from it. It's always going to be something that differentiates you from getting a job versus not getting a job. A lot of people tend to focus on the resume first, but really your resume is just a key to get you into the door. After that, it all comes down to how you interview. One thing to think about is if you're applying online and you're getting invited to interview, but you're not getting any official offers, the problem is not your resume, it's basically how you're interviewing. A lot of companies these days, because of legal reasons, we can't give you feedback after you interview. So that can be really frustrating, and also it's hard to tell when to improve. But basically, if you're interviewing and not getting offers, no matter what they tell you, it's because you're not interviewing well enough, which is unfortunate. But the good news is it's a skill. So the more you practice it, the better eventually you'll be. Feel free to like comment in here. I'll stick around a few more minutes and see if I can answer any questions. But yeah, thank you guys so much, and check out my website or my YouTube channel as well for more helpful content.
Awesome. You heard it from the man himself. Hopefully you've all learned a lot in today's 90-minute session. Stick around for Thursday, where we talk again to the monk dude and talk about how to stay mindful during this time. In the meantime, improve your interview skills. Go to careershakers.com or email Corey, and I'm sure he'll get back to you as quickly as he can. Well, thank you again, Corey. Really appreciate your time.
Can we post can we post the PowerPoint on the
post a link
possible?
and we'll pin it in the video. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah. So everyone will have access to the PowerPoint and all the tips and tricks that we went over today. So that's awesome.
Cool. Awesome. And we'll see all of you out here in the group here as we all quarantine together, and let us know if you have any questions. Thanks again, Corey.
Thank you, everyone. I appreciate it. Be safe.
Bye.